All right, fellow show skiers, let's talk ski handles 101. And as discussed in previous sections of these videos and everything, there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's a lot of different techniques for making these. I am going to show you in this video section how to make a very generic 5-foot handle section for, it could be a pyramid base rope, it could be an ATB rope, anything like that, whatever you use basic handles for, it'll be a standard 5-foot section. I'll also try to go through some of the variations and some things to do and things not to do along the way. So let's start with supplies. What do you need? Other than the basic tools talked about in some of the other videos, like a fid, a marker, tape, cutting utility, a tape measure, what else do you need to make a 5-foot handle section? Well, you need some ski rope. What kind? Typically for show skiing, I advise the non-stretch stuff, like show ski tack or HDPE. There are certain instances, now if you're making a handle section for say like 3 event, those folks oftentimes, depending on the athlete, they want stretchier. They want it to give a little bit closer to the body. That's personal preference. I have run across some jumpers that want more give closer to the body, so they want like a poly P kind of rope that stretches a bit. But for most show ski stuff, you want to go mostly non-stretch. This happens, what I'm showing you right now, this is HDPE, and I cut 2 sections. I cut a 5-foot section, and then I cut a 10-foot section. And if there's rope makers watching this, yes, I'm a little wasteful with rope, but I don't want to come up short at the end. So for basic handle, a 10-foot and a 5-foot, something pretty non-stretch. The other thing you need is what's typically called the bar. That's what most places where you buy them from call it, even though it's a handle. It's a water ski handle, but it's oftentimes called the bar. I have some different examples of bars here, and we'll look at those in just a minute. The other thing you need, depending on the type of bar or type of handle you get, are some end caps. I just happen to have these in a box, and these are 4-inch end caps. There are also 1-inch. I've seen these also in 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch, depending on what you want out of the handle. But you can't go wrong with these. These are a little bit cheaper. They're 4-inch. They're molded rubber, and we'll talk about how to use these later, but you need a pair of these typically for just about any of these you're going to make. And then you need that bar. So this is a water ski handle, or a bar as you call it. This happens to be a 12-inch one. That is the most common size. Other common ones are 10-inch or 15-inch. The 15-inch are typically only used for some barefoot handles, and also sometimes occasionally swivelers like a bigger handle, and we'll go 15-inch. Once in a truly rare while, I've had a request from a trick skier for a 15-inch, but they tend to be pretty big, pretty bulky, and if you're in a mass act with a bunch of people and those things are dragging in the water, that is a lot that can take skis out and that kind of thing. So typically a 12-inch, and every one I have to show you here is all 12-inch variations. This one right here is probably the most common one that you can buy today. It is a 12-inch handle. It's got a fairly thick aluminum, so it's got a rubber grip, but underneath that is an aluminum cylinder, and it's pretty thick gauge to really take some hot starts, and it won't bend, and it's pretty good. These do sink, by the way. If you don't put any kind of a float anywhere on them, these will sink eventually, so when they fill with water. And they come with 1-inch end caps on there, but I'm going to recommend you don't use those. You'll see why in a little bit. So this is the most common one. Other variations are something like this. Again, a 1-inch end cap. This has a what's called textured grip, where that was a smooth grip on this last one. It's hard to see on camera, but there is most definitely kind of a gnarled texture to this grip. It also is a very narrow diameter. You can still find these around and everything. You can buy these. For people with bigger hands, it's a pretty small diameter grip for them to grab, so not always the best to make them out of. These I have not seen lately, but I have found teams that still have these in their collection. These were sold for a long time, and it was a bar that integrated the end cap, like molded onto it. And there's even a groove right here to fit the rope in. And these are not bad. They actually save you some time making the handle section if you can find them. And again, all of these have, again, rubber over an aluminum cylinder there. Pretty good, thick gauge kind of thing. This is the same bar as the first one. It's just showing you without the end caps. And this is typically what I will start with and what we're going to use as an example here for actually building a handle section. No 1-inch end caps on here. If you get them and they already have the end caps, you can pull those right off, kind of thing. You can see in there, again, pretty thick metal gauge in there for this, and this is pretty stock for what I would be using these days. Here's an example of what not to use. And by looking at it on camera, you can be like, well, wait a minute, it's all black, it's got 1-inch end caps, it's a 12-inch bar, it's got a rubber grip, should be good to go, right? Well, what you can't see on the camera is when I pick these two up that look very much the same is the weight. This one, which is what we want to use, is way heavier than this. At least double the weight in my hands, and there's a reason for that. If we could get inside of here, if we cut this apart and opened it up, we would find a super, super thin aluminum cylinder in there, and what's really giving it structural rigidity is a piece of wood dowel on the inside. These were sold for a long time. You can still find them out there. They're getting hard these days. You don't want these. The nice part is they float. Whoop-de-doo, that's great, because the wood dowel floats them. The wood dowel also rots, and quicker than you might think, too. So if you're on a team like most teams I've been on, these ropes aren't getting dried properly in between practices and shows, especially during the summer. You got a busy schedule going on. They're probably hanging, and perhaps they're getting dripped on by other ropes in a rack from further up. And in a humid environment, that wood starts rotting in 2 to 3 seasons. And so these are a problem. And as soon as that wood begins to rot, the aluminum cylinder isn't heavy enough gauge. You take a good hot pyramid hit with this thing will just fold right in half on you, if not snap outright altogether. So you do not want these thin gauged ones with the wood dowels in the middle. Don't recommend them at all. So those are the parts you need. You need the bar, 10-inch, 12-inch, or 15-inch, generally 12. You need the end caps, typically 4, maybe the 8s if you want to go a little bit longer. And then the rope, a 5-foot section and a 10-foot section. Those are all the parts you need to get started to make a 5-foot handle section. This short part is on what not to do. So it's a big hint for me, things that I have just going to own it and have done wrong in the past. And I don't want you to make the same mistake. So, short of finding a handle or a bar like this that has these kind of grommets for the rope already built into it, you need to use some kind of an extended end cap. Here's why. If you're like me, and the teams that you've skied on, or the team you're skiing for, you have to put yourself in ski show mode, like actual show night mode. And you're performing a show, and when these ropes are getting done, they're getting dragged up on shore. And most places where I ski, they are somewhere along the way getting dragged up on rocks, gravel, asphalt, concrete, something like that, which means there's a lot of friction going on. So one of the common mistakes that I see made is somebody gets a good quality handle or bar like this, gets the 1-inch end caps on the end, and then builds their handle around this. And you end up with something, now I'm not going to actually make it, that'll come later, but imagine you got this handle section like this, and this is what it would look like then. You would have the rope wrapped around the outside of this. Well, the problem is that is now getting dragged across those surfaces with a lot of friction that are rough. Again, the asphalt or the concrete or whatever, and that rope begins to fray almost immediately. So what's the difference? I will tell you that making, not using these nice long end caps, if you don't use them, you can probably make the handle section in half the time, which is great, but it's not going to last very long. The more this gets dragged, especially when it's, big sets like a pyramid set of ropes or whatever, the faster this is going to fray to the point where it's now unsafe, and then it just plain snaps and wears out. And so, You make it without end caps, yeah, you're probably going to get, 3 seasons, maybe 4 out of it. Make it with end caps. I've seen, with end caps, provided something else doesn't happen to the rope, it should last for 10 years without a problem, because the end cap will take the brunt of all that friction and rubbing, and it protects the rope from fraying. So a big suggestion is, don't just do this. Don't just buy with the 1-inch end cap and then make your rope around the outside like this, like most people do, and then now it's sitting there and it can abrade. Typically I will get, because these are the easiest to find right now, I'll get these bars and I'll rip these end caps off and I'll start building my rope from there, and use, typically because they're the cheapest, I'll use 4-inch rubber end caps on the end to help protect that rope. Yes, they also aid when you're there, protects like the sides of your fingers from getting abraded and stuff like that if you grip out near the end of the handle. But really, it's about keeping that rope there safe, keeping it from getting abraded, and then the handle lasts much longer time, and it's safe for all those heavy starts you need to do. So there's kind of a what not to do. Let's start jumping in on actually building this handle section. So here we go, part 1 of making your 5-foot handle section. I'm going to use my 10-foot section of rope to demonstrate this part, but you need to do these exact steps with both pieces of rope, both the 10-footer and the 5-footer. One of the things I recommend is wrapping one end with electrical tape really tight, like twisting it really tight to give it a little bit of a point that keeps it from fraying, and you'll see there'll be a step in a little while that will make that easier. So I always start with that. So I've got, 2 to 3 inches of tape here, something like that, not very big. And I put this on at an angle, and I'm pulling on it and putting some tension on it and wrapping that and twisting it at the end. So it looks like that. That's going to keep all this from fraying, and when I need to pass through the handle, it makes it easier. On the other end, I need to make a loop. And I need to make a loop so that about 6 inches of rope gets buried down inside here, and the loop should be just larger than the diameter of whatever handle you're using. So in this case, I want to get this loop about like that. All right, so the diameter of that loop is going to be just a little bit bigger than the handle itself. So it looks like this. I'm going to use my fid, the rope in there a little bit. I do tend to tape. Again, you don't have to. If you can thread this through without taping, that's just fine. If you do tape, like I mentioned in the other videos, you got to pull it tight. You want it very, very smooth so the tape itself doesn't catch. How much rope do you use? I can't give you an exact measurement. Again, you want about 6 to 7 inches coming down buried in the rope once you have that done. So I'm going to start right about here, and I'm pushing into the core, the hollow core of the rope, and I'm just going to thread that along. Pretty good right about there, and again, you can always check right around the handle. So maybe just a smidge tighter, but not much. You don't want that to close up too much. Yeah, that's fitting good and tight right now. So that's good right there. I can always back pull it too a little bit if needed, if it gets too tight. All right. So I'm going to open this up just slightly. And that looks really good right there. Okay, so you can see that. So then, what I'm going to do is with my fid, this is the key part right here to doing this. Not through the top here, but from kind of the inside of the loop, halfway through the loop. I'm going to punch my fid through, and I'm going to leave it in the rope. So right through the middle. There we go. And I'm going to leave that sit in there. So that's kind of the key to this. So again, show it up into the camera, how I have that, and that is going to be the key to make this easy. All right, with that in mind, I have my 12-inch bar, 12-inch handle. This one did have end caps, the little black 1-inch end caps. I have taken those off because I'm going to make this, again, the way I prefer. It takes a bit longer, but I'm going to put the full surround 4-inch end caps on this when done. All right, here's how I do this. I kind of have all 3 pieces sitting in my hands. This is one rope. This is the 10-footer. I have the taped end. I have the end with the loop I made with the fid through it, and then I also have the handle or the bar. I pass the taped end through the handle, right through the opening in it. I then put that taped end into the fid and use that fid to then pull that through. Now this may look like a mess, but as you keep tightening, you'll see what happens here. So I keep pulling all the way through, and then this is where you got to work it all the way through so the loop goes around the outside of the handle there. And now I pull this all tight. And you can't pull too tight on this. Ugh. That's what it should look like when it's done. It is all cinched in. Passes through the rope there. For some people, if you find this is hard to get this tight, one of the things I do is I go and find some concrete and I actually stand on the rope. So I'll put all my body weight, stand out with some shoes, and give the handle a couple of good hard yanks to really crank this down. You want this as tight as possible. You want this loop as smooth around here as possible, because in the next section, doing the end caps, if this is bulked up right here, it'll be very hard to get these on. So again, do this, crank this as tight as I can, pull this good and tight. That seems excellent right there. That's what it should look like. And now I'm going to repeat the exact same process with my other piece of rope. Get the loop, tape the end, do the exact same thing on the other side of the handle. When you are done with part 1, it should look something like this. You should have 2 pieces of rope dangling down, and we're ready to put on the end caps now. That's kind of a different section, so let's jump into it. Getting the end caps on can be somewhat of a challenge, especially if they're brand new and they're sort of stiff and everything. You need to find a way to get these things to kind of stretch over the handle and over the rope that you've already looped on. I've seen a bunch of different ways of doing this. I've seen some people use like white lithium grease to do it. Unfortunately, to me that ends up, it works, but it's really just sloppy and messy. but you could do that and grease them to get them on. I prefer to use heat, but you have to be careful with that. I've seen some people do this with blow torches, and they just have a blowtorch running on a tool bench, and you just have to heat these gently from a distance. They don't have a real high melting point, so they kind of melt low. It's a soft rubber, and so if you get too much heat on a blowtorch, you'll just melt right through these things. Other things you can use, a blow dryer on high, so like a hair blow dryer will work. You have to blast it on high for a little bit to get these things kind of malleable. Or you can use a heat gun, like you would use for stripping paint. That's what this is. It's a paint stripper gun, gets really hot. This will certainly work, but even this, if you have this on high and you really blast too close, you can melt these things. Another way to do it is to dip them in a pot of gently boiling water. There too, you can get it too hot. So you can get a pot on your stove and be doing this like in the kitchen. And what I do is I typically hold them with a pliers, and then I will dip them for about 30 seconds into that hot water to basically get this, loosened up and stretchable. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do that here. This is kind of a part 2 of the video of getting these things loosened up enough to put on, and we'll show you them actually going on the handle. But just know that this can be a challenge in and of itself, and then when they cool down, they'll shrink back and tighten up around the handle, and they should stay on then. All right, welcome to the workshop here. A little bit different environment, and it's going to get noisy too because I'm going to have to use the heat gun. So what happens in this process happens fairly quickly. So I'm going to try to show it to you as best I can here. I've already done one side of this. That way I have the heat gun warmed up and ready to go. So this is the paint stripper gun that I'm using. And I'm using it on the low setting, by the way, because I have actually melted one of these before on the high setting and being a little too aggressive with it. So I use this on low. If you're using a hair blow dryer, that I would use on high kind of thing. I also have a couple of extra tools here. There's some other stuff from other projects here, but I've got a needle nose pliers like this. I've got a couple of small ones. I've had luck with these in the past. If it gets stuck a little bit, these help pull the thing on when I'm ready to go. Again, I have one end taped. It helps with this process to have this taped on the end. I'm going to pass this through, and so this is where I'm going to feed on my 4-inch end cap. So here we go. I use the needle nose just so I don't cook my hand in there, and I'm really just heating the end of it. And we're going to give this probably about 45 seconds or so to heat up and get cooked a little bit. Do be careful, this can get warm to the touch as I start working with this. Obviously this rubber is going to be hot. I'm also noticing the rubber get a little shiny right now, which is telling me it's getting hot. So I'm probably pretty good here. Pass in from the top, going down like this through the thicker opening, and I run the rope all the way down. And I get to the end, and this is where then I need to start working this, and the needle nose pliers comes in handy here to get this. And yes, that rubber is a bit on the hot side. So there's no magic to this. You got to kind of work it around with the pliers. That's why I have a couple of them here if needed. Sometimes an extra set of hands helps right here to have another person helping you with this part, because once the rubber cools down, you have to reheat it again if you don't get it over in time. And with that, I am looking pretty good. And I do give this a couple tugs. I make sure it's flat, because it's going to kind of, when it cools down, it's going to, kind of go to that shape. So it's on here. You'll notice it's a bit loose right here. Don't worry about that. What I would do now, you want this thing to tighten up fast, go throw it in your freezer. Throw it in for 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and it is good. And that will tighten all back up. And then I've got my end cap on nicely on the handle. And now we'll go to part 3, finishing this thing up. Okay, We are on to part 3 now, and this is the final step. This is finishing up our handle. We've got our end caps on. Again, these are optional, but recommended all the way through. So now we need to do 2 pieces to finish this up. We need to make the V-knot, that's what I call it, however far away from the handle we're going to be. There isn't a hard and fast rule for that. My typical guideline I use personally, if it's a 12-inch handle, I'm going 10 inches out where I'm going to make the knot to set the V. And then, of course, we have this long 10-foot piece of rope right here, and I am going to then put a loop at the end at 5 feet and loop that so that it can be connected to a main line, and we'll talk about main lines in the next video. All right, let's finish this up. So on our short piece, which was originally our 5-footer, there's not so much left now, I'm going to put my fid on the short piece of rope. Again, I tend to tape. And if you've watched these videos all the way through, one of the introductory videos at the beginning was showing you the basic show ski knots that we use for most of that, and those still apply here to making a handle section. And so for these 2 knots, I never want to come back and adjust this really again. Any adjustments we're going to do on the main line towards the boat, on the boat end. And that's really where, as things stretch and the rope wears over time, that's where you're going to make adjustments. So this, we want to lock this in, so we're going to use the permanent style knot, the one that when you cinch it tight once, it's pretty much locked in there and never coming out. So you want to take your time with this part, you want to do it right. I will say that an extra set of hands right now is helpful. So as you get close to cinching this knot tight that I'm going to show you, having somebody actually hang on to this thing in front of them like they're skiing is a good idea. If you've been show skiing longer than a year or two, we've all probably found that handle where it feels like it's at a slight angle. That's because of the knot we're making right now, and most often when there's a problem, it's because that knot has slipped or it was tightened down at the wrong place. So I'm going to do my, it's hard to see, but I've already marked my 10 inches on this rope going out, and here we go. Take my fid on the short line, this is the short line, and right where I've made my mark, I'm going to pass straight through the rope. Right through the middle. By the way, I should mention, if you are optionally putting floats, so some teams have short floats available, the short little 6-inch ones, you would obviously want to thread those on before you do this step right here. I'm not putting floats on this at all, so if you have the really short ones that go up near the handle, those little 6-inch ones, those go on right now prior to this knot. If you have the ones that go on the main line, those go on after this knot, but before you do the final loop. All right, so I have passed through the middle of that rope, and I have this tail hanging here. What I'm going to do is the knot where I wrap completely around the rope and then down through the middle. All right, going through. And I know that's hard to see on here. Go back to my other videos where I've showed it up close, but I wrap once around completely. And I know that looks like a mess right now, and now I'm going down through the long part right here. And I've got that in there, and now I'm going to bury. How much do you bury? It's really up to you. I bury about a foot, give or take. All right, and I'm going to pull that out now, and I'm going to let this loop cinch down and around. And again, I have another video that shows this knot up close. This is not the one that came, I described it as kind of the Mad City or Cap City knot, where you can take it out even after 2, 3, 4 years of use. This is not that knot. This is the one that welds in there tight. Now, I'm going to get it to about here. And if this looks a little bulky, that's because I haven't cinched it tight yet. Because this is the key step. Don't pull it tight right away. This is where you have that extra set of hands. I'm going to try to do this on my own. It's a little tougher. But I can adjust this just with my fingers right now. I can either pull that knot back out or I can tighten it down. And right now, I can feel that I'm not quite on the money. this side is a little too long right here. So I'm going to push a little bit of that through. And now I'm going to begin pulling that knot a little tighter. And I'm going to check again. Boy, that seems pretty on the money. Here, let me get that out of the way. And when I hold that, that feels really good in my grip. But this is where having another person to help you is great. And again, until you really tug on this knot, it's not in there. I can adjust it if need be, but that is feeling really good. So now I'm going to give this some yanks. And now that knot is coming down really tight. Check again. Yeah, that's feeling like it's got really good pull on it. It's nice and even. You still, until this thing gets used a few times behind a boat, you can come back with some needle nose pliers and you can still kind of maneuver this thing out if you need to adjust a ½ inch one way or the other to get that evened up. But she's feeling pretty good right now. This rope, this little tail that's left, is now excess. I'm going to pull this out a little bit and snip it so it buries itself back in there. All right, I got that part done. Ready to go. And that thing is in there. So now I've got the long, still 10-foot hunk of rope. And I need to make a loop at the end, and I want to be right on the money with this. Again, standard water ski handle section, pretty much across disciplines, is 5 feet. That goes for swivel lines, jump ropes, pyramid ropes, whatever. Your standard basic handle section always ends at 5 feet, and then your main lines, which we'll go into in the next video, could be different. So bear with me for a moment. I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to measure out from my handle, the back side of my handle, down this rope, and I'm going to mark wherever 5 feet is. Okay, I was just off camera. It was easier to stretch out a tape measure on the floor, and I measured again from the back side of the handle out, and it's hard to see, but there's a black mark there. That is the end of my loop right there. That is exactly 5 feet. Now, if you've used some good quality non-stretch, low-stretch rope, even though this is brand new, this is only 5 feet long, folks. You're not going to get much stretch out of this at all, so you don't need to really worry about this lengthening. Maybe an inch you're going to get out of this. That should be about it. I typically don't worry about that at all at this point. So I follow kind of my standard stuff right here. This is going to be the end of my loop. I go out right about 2 feet, give or take. Not being real precise right now. Just doing this for the camera to get it done. I'm going to snip off this excess. And I'm going to put my fit on here. And again, I'm going to use the permanent knot here. Not the one that comes out, but permanent, because I should never have to go back and adjust this, hopefully, again. I am going to do this rather quickly because, again, there's another video that breaks down putting these loops in more detail. You can go back and look at that one on the playlist. So here's my black mark. That's the end of my loop. Make sure it's about 6 inches, give or take. And I pass straight through, just like this. And once I am through there, I check my mark again for the end of the loop. And now it's the permanent one. Once around, and then down through the middle in the core. Once around, down through the middle, through the core of the rope, and I will start working this with my fingers until that knot is tight. So, keep going here, pull that tight, and with that, I'm looking good, and now I get my fit out, and I am finished. Alright. Got my fit off. If I pull that right, I can now back pull this like this and the rope disappears. It's buried. I've got my loop and my 5-foot handle section is complete. Got my handle here ready to go. Good even V on there. Got a loop at the end at 5 feet. And now I can thread this onto a main line and I'm ready to ski with it. Check out the next video and we'll talk about main lines and how to make those, stretch them, and adjust them.